So, without further ado, can I have all of my speakers up to the stage, please? Let's give them all a round of applause again. First of all, thank you very much to our speakers. It's lovely to have you all here. And as I said, the first question is something that I'm personally interested in. So, a lot of you mentioned that there are a lot of new jobs that are coming onto the scene, some of which we are not sure what they're going to be. So, I'd like you to let me know, what do you think are the next wave of jobs that we're going to see in this FinTech blockchain industry? So, I'll start with you, Helen, if that's okay.
Okay. I'll just take the mic. I think we're short of a mic. So obviously, I mean, there's still a great shortage of developers, particularly in blockchain, and that's still in high demand. But I think we're kind of getting into the area where you've got medium-sized companies now, which we didn't have before. When I sort of first started this, you had kind of startups with maybe 1 or 2 founders, and you had people looking for developers, and you had people building projects within big organizations. But now we're moving to companies being medium-sized. So people are looking for things like operations people, public affairs people, people that can do marketing and communications. So if you like those kind of jobs that are about growing companies and business development. So I think that's going to be a huge area of growth.
I'm not sure whether people saw me vehemently nodding to what Helen was saying, but there was a lot of things that you said, especially regarding operations, that is quite key. I think in addition to that, the roles that are really opening up are the roles that involve programming the technology of the future. You know, if you look at the rise of AI, if you look at machine learning, you know, I think the idea that AI is going to take our jobs, with the greatest of respect, it's going to take a hell of a long time for that to happen. And I'll tell you why. We're imperfect humans. And as long as there are imperfect humans, it's difficult to create perfect robots. So you know, you're going to need the skill set required to tell that robot or to tell that technology what to do, because the whole premise on which technology was built was on instruction. You give it an instruction to follow, and it follows. You know, whether it's predictive models to be able to predict, I don't know whether it's an economic, whatever you want to predict, right? You know, it still requires the input of data. Fine, it won't always be manual, but there will have to be a human involved in that process. And I feel that even the creativity of us as humans and our ability to innovate and think and reason is still very valuable going forward.
I would echo that, definitely. And I think, as you said, any kind of function of a bigger company will also be needed in all of those companies that have been created now with all these ICOs, etc. So whether that be communications or operations or whatever. And then going back to developers, I mean, I looked into coding. There's so many schools in London. There's General Assembly,
Women Who Code.
They're amazing. I haven't got the time at the moment, so I decided not to do it. I parked it. But they even sponsor ladies. They've just finished their studies or they're studying. So I definitely look into it, because when I was at university, I didn't do a coding course because I thought, I'm not going to need it. How silly of me, right? So I think that's definitely something, to look at.
I should maybe just add one more thing, which I forgot to say, sorry Natalie, which was design. I think, you know, the other big thing is user interface. You know, a lot of the products we have around cryptocurrency and blockchain today are not user friendly. They still require a certain amount of techie knowledge, or are still a bit clunky to use, and you sort of feel quite put off by them. And I know a lot of companies are now looking to build something really beautiful. You know, if you think about when, you know, the Mac came along and the Apple products came along, it was so beautiful and people loved it because it looked really nice, and it was also really, really simple. One click, one button, you know, very, you know, no drop-down menus and things. You just figured out how to use it intuitively. And I think that design piece and telling the stories through design, I'm a wordsmith, but, you know, I try to think a lot more in pictures and images now, because I think that's the way the world has moved, and I'm always just really thinking in words. But, you know, for most of this, we need better imagery and better design to help communicate the messages as well.
I mean, we've talked about this many, many times. And in fact, I've even thought about the top people that currently exist in companies. We currently think about CEOs, COOs, CFOs, CCOs, maybe CMOs, but what about CPOs, Chief Product Officers, people that have that ability to understand sort of the business analyst point of view, understand what the consumer wants, understand what the design people sort of from a design perspective to improve the user experience. And personally, I see a new wave of jobs coming very much on that line. And you only have to look at the success of Coinbase, for example. How many people here have heard of Coinbase? Okay, right. So it became so popular really because of its user experience. So
I was going to say, I've got 2 more points though. 2 R's, research and regulation. Regulation, the reason why I thought it was worth adding is because one of the headaches that the FCA has is regulating new technology. And it's hard because, you know, within the remit, it sort of comes slightly outside of the remit of what they're supposed to do. But now they're having to look at not necessarily regulating the technology itself, but regulating its use. And that's why I mentioned, you know, during my presentation about compliance and risk, because there is a lot of regulations to get through, whether it's PSD2 in terms of payments, or understanding how you can use blockchain to make yourself more compliant, you know, as a financial services firm. There's a lot of regulation that needs to be deciphered that would cause, you know, someone like even JP Morgan a few years ago, they spent $2 billion investing in their compliance department, hiring an extra 13,000 employees. So, you know, to tell you how big a headache it is, the regulation is posing for companies. If you're not compliant, you're going to get hit with fines. You don't want to get hit with fines and have to start hiring extra people. So if you know anyone that knows anything about regulation, even, you know, the 4th Money Laundering Directive or anything that's due to come out, you know, over the next 6 to 18 months, you have a job.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, so lots of jobs out there. So that was actually a large discussion, actually. So I'm going to open it up now to the audience. So if anyone from the audience has any questions, please raise your hands and you can mention the panel member that you want to ask it to, or just ask it to the whole panel if you like. So Susan has the mic.
Questions,
we have one here at the front.
Questions, here we go.
I will repeat your question just for the purpose of filming, okay?
I'm probably the least knowledgeable person in the room.
That's wrong.
No.
You'll be knowledgeable about something that we're not knowledgeable about.
So I work for a charity and in London, but we're based in Wales and England, and we have a paper currency that people can earn by volunteering.
What's the company called?
It's called Tempo.
Tempo.
And we've had 50,000 people earn it by volunteering and sharing their skills, their assets, and they can spend them on time-based activities across the UK. So it's a charity that works from funding of grants, but mainly through income that we get from working in projects with local authorities. We are getting more interest and we want to work with more organisations, but the physical currency has challenges, and we want to look at how tech can help us tackle those challenges and also scale. Like, blockchain has been bandied about as, you know, look at this. We're like, okay, cool, but we're not sure the best place to start. And if you had any advice on that as a starting point from like a charity that was a startup 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that would be really helpful.
So that's really interesting. So it's looking at a charity that already has a way of exchanging assets in a paper form, and you're almost looking at how you can digitise that.
Yeah.
So what tips do the panel have for this? So we start this time with Anna.
Well, first of all, I didn't mean to shout at you. I just thought, no, you're not. Don't start like that, because already what you said, I mean, I don't know anything about that. So how to start with that? That's a really good question. So you've already got the paper form and you're looking to digitise it.
Yeah, well, it's just getting to a scale now where it would be very difficult to keep it analogue. So yeah,
That's really interesting.
kind of yes, but we want to make sure we're making a decision when it's fit for purpose and it's right for.
Sure. Have you spoken with anyone in the industry already? I mean, I'd say. Oh, okay, you have.
Only somebody that met us in a cafe and said we should look at blockchain.
Okay, only someone you've met in a cafe to tell you to look at blockchain. I mean, I would talk to people in the industry. I'm sure that Helen would be able to give you tons of contacts to help you out in that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of people that I could definitely connect you with who are working on humanitarian and kind of blockchain for good projects in the sector who would give you, I think, good advice about things that you could do. I mean, you could think about, you know, taking donations in cryptocurrency, but more importantly, it sounds like what you're doing could be something that you could launch your own token and do it that way. But you would need to obviously take some kind of advice about, first of all, what the things are you could do, and also what's feasible for you as a charity, because it depends what resources you have. Because one of the very first events I did with Unblocked was actually on blockchain in the kind of philanthropic sector. You know, and people were kind of saying, well, look, you know, my charity doesn't even have a database. You know, and I've worked with a lot of charities over the years, and actually a lot of them don't even have a database of their donors. So, you know, the idea that they're going to suddenly launch a blockchain project when they don't have any technical advisors or they don't have the money to do it. But I think you could start to get some ideas about how you could build a kind of feasibility study for doing that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a great reflection of what's going on. It's lovely to meet people with real problems that require digitization, which I think sometimes a lot of us jump to try and create a problem and trying to attach blockchain to it. Whereas if we can find more people like yourself with a true problem that you need to digitize, then that's awesome. So next question from the audience.
Which sector do you think will be the first to gain blockchain adoption?
Interesting. Which sector do you think will be the first to get blockchain adoption? I think Anna wants to respond. Do you want... No? Oh, okay.
I just wanted to say I'm biased. Finance.
I mean, finance is definitely the most advanced. If you look at the data, this sort of mapping of the blockchain landscape, you know, the amount of investment and the number of companies that are out there, it's still kind of probably at least 85-90% finance. And then the next biggest sector is energy, followed by healthcare, and then all of the others, creative industries and marketing and sort of ad tech, smaller segments of that. So, I mean, based on that, you would say it would be finance. I think that it depends whether you look, I mean, I'm talking actually about the UK there for the mapping, but it's probably similar across the world. I think if you start to look globally, you'll see it accelerate in different areas and different parts of the world. So maybe a more interesting question is which areas of the world will it accelerate fast? And I think that probably won't be in Europe.
I was even going to add to that. I think it's going to be in emerging markets, the Africas, the Indias, the Chinas, because what blockchain is providing the solution for is infrastructure that we take for granted here. That it's almost like that's the only alternative that they have. So the way that they use technology over there is completely like mind-boggling to us. I mean, for example, like now, if you go to Africa, there's people who have 6, maybe, well, I'm not sure, maybe about 6, but maybe 3 SIM cards in a mobile phone. So just that simple use case and example of the way they use technology is the reason why I'm hopeful for emerging markets.
I just wanted to echo that even on the institutional side, that's why we're focused on emerging markets, because all the infrastructure that I spoke about, all those players that are in part of their life cycle, they often don't exist there. So for instance, when it comes to shareholder voting, a lot of the time in the Middle East, it doesn't even exist. So what do? Straight to blockchain. It's a bit like the straight to mobile analogy where many people didn't even have a bank account and then the first one they had on their mobile. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'll echo that again. I spoke to a journalist at The Lancet only a few months ago, and she agreed that it was the emerging markets. So, maybe final question of the evening? Oh, one at the back.
Hi. I was just wondering from sort of jurisdictional point of view, where do you, from like a regulatory side of things, where do you see like the main centres for ICOs in terms of regulatory environment? Because obviously we see like France is like looking to be like a reasonable home, Malta, and I'm just thinking like what are the jurisdictions are you seeing that are in the running, and where do you think the eventual like top tier of homes might be?
I think maybe we have Christiana wants to answer this question maybe first.
I mean, you sort of answered it by part in your question in terms of mentioning Malta. I mean, I was having that discussion with a few people a few days ago about how the legal framework in Malta has given rise to so many crypto exchanges. And I'd say that also Switzerland have made considerable progress. I think that actually, in my estimation, I'm just guessing, I'm just throwing it out there, Estonia might be another place. And that's because I feel like their willingness to embrace blockchain in their voting system, and the willingness for them to embrace distributed ledger technologies is, I just feel it's going to be a natural extension that they'll then move to cryptos and ICOs, and the legal framework that they'll build around that is what makes me think that it's conducive to, look there next when it comes to crypto and ICOs or legal and regulation.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this. I'm doing a bit of mapping at the moment, trying to work out, what's going on in regulation around the world. And there's this kind of arbitrage going on, and where people flock to the places where it's easiest to do business, most conducive to do business. And that might be access to capital, which, a lot of companies are being funded from Asia and other parts of the world, not necessarily from Europe and the US, but also where the regulatory environment is most friendly. And obviously certain places like Gibraltar and Malta are trying really, really hard to create good frameworks to be regulated and to build there. And it's really hard for businesses to build in a climate of uncertainty. If you can't plan, you don't know what's going to happen to your business. You can't really think very far ahead. 6 months ahead or something is not really enough to plan a successful company. So, I think the jury's still out. I think there's a few places you mentioned. Crypto Valley in Switzerland. You mentioned Gibraltar, Malta. I think some of those places are trying really hard. The French are kind of trying to do a sort of self-regulatory process, I guess, where you don't have to sign up, but if you do, it's good for you, and if you don't, people wonder why you haven't. So, that's another approach. I think the other question is, there's been a lot of silly talk about Brexit and blockchain and whether or not it's a solution to the Irish border and this kind of thing, but actually the way markets are going to work is it's going to pull people to the places where it's easiest to do business. And if you think about Estonia, the idea of creating a new residency and creating a company very, very quickly and having the sort of possibilities to launch companies quickly, that's going to be where capital and companies are going to go. So we're going to be competing on which countries are the most favourable places to do business in a digital world. And if you think about it like that, then you can kind of see some places that are starting to sort of rise to the top.
Wonderful. Well, round of applause to all of our panelists. Thank you very much. So beer on tap. I don't know if there's any Prosecco, but please stick around, network with people if you're interested in joining us for our leadership program, or interested in any courses, or just want to chat, then enjoy. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.